There it is. So big welcome along to everybody this evening. We're really pleased to have you with us today. This is our first seminar specifically for secondary schools on the biodiversity theme. So hopefully it's something that you'll find useful. My name is Claire Patton. I'm the Green Schools Biodiversity Officer, so I'll be your main contact throughout this theme. I know some of you are just beginning your work on biodiversity and some are in your second year, so we have kind of different levels of experience, but what I'm going to do with you is give you a bit of background on the biodiversity theme, why we've chosen it as the theme, why it's important, and then I'll go through the kind of the 7 steps to kind of working on your flag over the next either year or 2 years, depending on what stage you're at. So just a little bit of background first on Green Schools. So Green Schools is part of the Environmental Education Unit of Antashka. So Antashka is a pretty big organization. We have got lots of different organizations within it. So you might have worked on some of them before, like National Spring Clean or Clean Coasts, and maybe Safe Routes to School, your school might be involved in. So we do have lots of different kind of groups that we work with a lot. So you might get involved with some of these throughout. And I should say before I go too far as well that we will be sharing this presentation with you at the end, so you don't need to kind of write anything down. And Lisa will be sharing links with you in the chat of things that I talk about. So I'll just move on here. The Green Schools program itself, it's an international program, so it's run in countries all around the world. It's run by an organization called FEE, and in other countries it's generally called Eco Schools, but in Ireland it's known as Green Schools. But the same kind of 7-step process that is being worked on in your schools is also being done throughout the world, really. So it's happening all over. It's an award scheme, so the aim of it is for you to achieve your green flag at the end, and we hope that it's a long-term program that the whole school gets involved in. And it's run all throughout Ireland, so it's just under 90% of all schools in Ireland take part. So that adds up to quite a lot of students, teachers, and schools overall. And it's very much a partnership, so there's lots of different people involved in the running of the Green Schools program. Obviously the schools themselves and students and teachers are running it on the ground, and then we rely on support from our sponsors and industry and our local authorities to support us and to support schools in running the program. So one important source for you guys is your local environmental awareness officer. So that's probably the person who'll be carrying out a renewal visit in your school, and I'll talk to you more about that later. And they're also a great link for you throughout your work on the theme, especially to local initiatives. I think Ella Ryan is with us at the moment from Waterford. I don't know, do you want to say hello, Ella, while you're here?
I do. I'm permanently muting myself when I say hello usually. Apologies for that. Yeah, thanks very much, Claire. I'll keep it really brief. I suppose I'm just listening in to learn a little bit more about the biodiversity this theme this year, and to remind any teachers from Waterford that we're here to help if they get any problems along the way. Thanks.
Thanks, Ella. So yeah, I know that we have people from schools all around the country, so you will all have a local environmental awareness officer. I just have the contact details up of some of the EAOs who might be with us this evening, but you will all have a contact person for your area. So just to before we get started is just to say that Green Schools is very much for everyone. So we really want to get as many people involved in the Green Schools program as possible, no matter what your background is. So no matter who you are, we all live on planet Earth, and we are all involved in trying to keep it a sustainable place to live. And another just little tidbit is that this year and next year, Antarctica are one of the SDG champions. So you're probably all familiar with the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goals. And these really tie into all of our work throughout Antarctica, and specifically with the biodiversity theme. It very much ties into Goal 15, Life on Land, trying to promote looking after all of our life, plants, animals, all kinds of biodiversity. So what you're doing does have a much bigger purpose. We are connected with this kind of global campaign, which is being run all over, and we're really pleased to be an SDG champion this year. So let's just get into biodiversity a bit. So as some of you may know, biodiversity is the 5th theme of the Green Schools program. So you probably were working on the travel theme before this. And the biodiversity, it's the last of what we call the core themes. So when your school finishes working on the biodiversity theme, you're not going to go on to something completely new. And what we do after this is we go into our global citizenship themes. That's what GC stands for here. And it basically, you almost go back to the start, litter and waste, but you focus on it from a global perspective. And so biodiversity, I said, it's the last one before you go into that cycle. And from my very biased perspective as the biodiversity officer, it's definitely one of the nicest themes to work on. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in it. So your school can kind of focus on what you enjoy, or what kind of outdoor space you have, or what area you're living in. And there's lots of good opportunities to hopefully get outside and kind of take practical actions that are going to make a difference in your community. And we're supported by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So one of the key things in terms of looking after biodiversity is to increase general public's awareness of it, and the importance of it. So that's why we have their support. And just to show you a few stats on just how much of an impact working on the Green Schools program can have. These are our statistics from last year across all of our themes. So I'll just pick out a couple of interesting ones. So I'll give you some on the global citizenship, food and biodiversity theme. So that's what your school might be on in another 10 years. We had 36 different types of food grown in schools, and over 40 different types of recipes grown with those crops. And then if we go back to the schools working on the very beginning, we had 74 very new schools on the first time, and 73% of those reduced the amount of rubbish going to landfill. So when you kind of are working away in your own school, it can be hard to know how much of an impact you're having, but there is actually huge differences being made when we look at the schools collectively, and what they're doing. And if we focus in on then biodiversity, so the schools who received their flag last year, they planted over 6,500 trees. They created over 300 new gardens, over 600 new bird feeding stations, and hundreds of other practical actions. So, when you put those numbers together, there is a real difference being made in terms of, creating habitats, and also growing awareness. So that's really positive. So what is biodiversity? It's kind of a difficult word, and something that isn't in our kind of natural vocabulary sometimes. I actually had to explain what it meant to my own mother not that long ago, and my job title is biodiversity officer, and it has been for years. So it's not something we naturally maybe use in our everyday language. So if you break it down, biodiversity, it kind of stands for biological diversity. So biological meaning living things and diversity meaning difference. So it's all of the different types of living things. So that includes plants, animals, both in sea and on land, and also things like fungi, bacteria, even viruses would all be considered part of biodiversity. And if you only take one message out of today, the one thing that really we want to pass on to people working on this theme is that the more biodiversity there is, the better. So the more variety we have, the better it is for the overall health of our planet. And it makes our environment stronger by having greater diversity. If you have all of this the same type of plant growing in an area, it's going to really restrict what else can live there and feed off it, and so on. And so we have much more resilience the more diverse we are. And biodiversity in Ireland, just to give you an idea of what we have. I wouldn't expect you to be specializing or learning about some of these in particular, but there's a huge amount of biodiversity here. So over 800 different types of flowering plants, nearly 80 different types of ferns, and 750 different types of mosses and liverworts. So probably nobody here is really going to specialize massively as a skill on mosses and liverworts, but it's just to show you that there is a huge range of things that you can look into on this theme. It's not, we're not kind of limiting you to just focus on the land mammals or the trees. You can really look at what you're interested in and maybe what is specialized in your local area. So why is it important? I could spend the whole hour talking about this, but please know I won't. I just kind of give you a few reasons. So probably the first thing people say is, providing trees, giving us oxygen and taking in carbon dioxide, which is really important. So that's one big reason. Our ladybird here is providing important pest control. So it's feeding on those little green aphids. So if you're a gardener, you really want to attract things like ladybirds, and that's the same across all of biodiversity. We have kind of a natural cycle of creatures keeping numbers in check and keeping a balance in nature. We have pollinators, massively important for our flowering plants and a lot of the food that we eat. We have really important biodiversity in our soil, again, allowing us to be able to grow food. We have plants which will help keep our waterways clean, filtering out some pollutants. It's also really important for, having fun outdoors and taking part in outdoor activities, adventure activities, and tourism. Provides us with all of the food that we eat, lots of the medicines that we take, and the products that come from biodiversity. For example, timber, we use every day. So there's tons and tons of reason why biodiversity is important. And as well as all of those, there's lots of species whose value we don't know about yet. They haven't been discovered. We don't know what the benefits of them are. There's lots of plants who maybe have important medicinal properties that we're not aware of yet, or that can help us in different ways. And on top of all those reasons, I do kind of hate kind of spelling it out like that, because I like to think that all biodiversity, all life has value, for itself. It's not all about what it can do for us. And it can be kind of a dangerous way of thinking when we look at things and just go, well, how does that help me? Rather than just kind of thinking of ourselves as part of nature and wanting to protect everything for its own value. But in saying that, we can also look at the financial value of biodiversity. As a lot of times it does come down to what things are worth when it comes to protecting it. And in Ireland, biodiversity is roughly valued at 2.6 billion euros each year. And most of that is due to the connections with farming and tourism. But it's a huge amount of financial value that we are getting from something that we do very little to protect generally. Now, this is the kind of the negative side of things, where I tell you all the problems about biodiversity, but I'll be brief. So we hear a lot about the climate crisis that we're in. We are also in a biodiversity crisis where we're losing huge amounts of biodiversity every year. And I'm just going to give you the main causes of that. So what's causing biodiversity loss? The biggest problem for biodiversity is the habitat loss and fragmentation. So those two factors account for the biggest reason for losing biodiversity. And it makes sense, if a habitat is lost, you're not going to be able to support the biodiversity that was living in it. And the difference between habitat loss and fragmentation, basically habitat loss is when an area is destroyed. So if a forest is cut down, or if a lake is dredged up, or whatever it is, if it's totally taken off the map, that's considered habitat loss. And then fragmentation means breaking habitat up into different pieces. So this might just happen by a road being built through an area. So you're only actually losing a small amount of the habitat, but by breaking it up into different sections, it can have a big impact on the biodiversity that was living there. They might not be able to access their entire range safely, and there might not be enough space for them in the fragments anymore. So those are the two biggest problems for biodiversity. We also have things like litter and pollution, which can cause massive problems for animals. And then climate change is starting to have a bigger and bigger impact. So there's big impacts of even small changes in weather. We've had pretty unusual weather this year, and you might notice things like in the effect that it has on plants. So for example, back in July, I was already eating blackberries, which is really early. So when the timeline changes for when plants begin to appear, that can show off the animals that generally rely on them for food, and that has a knock-on effect. So there's really lots and lots of possible impacts of climate change on biodiversity. Another factor is overexploitation. So that just means overuse of a certain resource, like for example, overfishing. So it's using something to an extent that they don't have a chance to recover. So it could be overfishing, overhunting, even something like taking, removing the whole hedge worth of blackberries in one go rather than leaving a certain amount behind. And then something else you might have heard of a bit recently, there was just a report out in the last couple of months on how much of an impact invasive species can have. So an invasive species is a plant or animal which isn't native, and which has been usually brought into either a country or even a continent or an area by humans, and which cause damage either by out competing. So if it's, for our example here of the gray squirrel, which brought in a disease that caused a lot of damage to our native red squirrels, and also by being kind of more competitive than them and feeding on the same food that they eat, but feeding on it more quickly. So that's all the negatives out of the way. This is like our reset slide of just going, okay, that's all of those factors are really important, but they're not the focus of this theme in schools. That's kind of just to give you some background on why it's so important and why we ask schools to take part in this theme. Really, we want the biodiversity theme to be more positive and looking at what positive steps we can take in our communities to help biodiversity. So what I'm going to do now is go through the kind of in school 7 steps that you need to accomplish to receive your biodiversity flag, and hopefully this gives you some ideas for taking part. So step 1 is to set up your Green Schools Committee, and there's quite a lot of flexibility in terms of how you do this. Every school will be different, so a lot of secondary schools might either rely on their TY group if they have one, or they might also recruit students from across the whole body. There's no exact right way to do it. It's what works for your school. All that you have to have are students on the committee and at least one staff coordinator. Apart from that, there's a lot of other things you can do, but you don't have to. So some schools will add in other staff members. So you might have other teachers, SNAs, maybe the caretaker or groundskeeper, maybe parents who are really interested, or community members might also get involved. Now, sometimes you're not going to be able to have all of these additional people at every committee meeting, but for example, for biodiversity, it's really great to get your caretaker on board, even just maybe to come to one meeting, or somehow have a connection to them so that they know what you're up to, especially if you're going to be working on your school grounds, because that's their bread and butter. And so it's really important to keep them on board. Some schools will have subcommittees it could be for other themes or for a particular area of your work. What is important is to try and get as much of the school body as involved as you can. It's not going to be possible for every step that you take to get everyone involved, but we do want you to try and communicate what you're doing to your school as much as you can, and maybe draw in different groups at different times of your work on the theme, so that people know what you're doing, and there's options for them to get involved if they want, but maybe they can't commit to being on the committee full time because they're in an exam year or whatever, for whatever reason. Okay, so step 2 then is your environmental review. So your environmental review, basically the idea is that you are evaluating what is the situation in your school like around biodiversity before you start doing any work on the theme. So are people aware of biodiversity? Are they interested in it? And what are your school grounds like? Is there a lot of space for biodiversity on your grounds? Are you in a school that has a lot of green space, or are you in maybe a more urban school where it's mostly concrete? So it's looking at what is the situation before you start. And when we say there's 2 essential actions, essential basically means that you'll be asked about it when you come to apply for your green flag. So when it says something's essential, it means kind of keep a record of anything work you do on this, and because you'll have to include it in your application form, and you might be asked about it in your renewal visit. So I'll just show you these 2 actions in a bit more detail. So the biodiversity awareness survey, it's 4 questions, and we've got a template for this that you can take from our website, and you don't have to ask every single student in the school these questions. If you have a really big school, you can do a certain selection from maybe each year group, if you can't give it to everybody. Some schools will do this online, like if your school if you use Teams, or if you use some kind of online platform for sharing information, you can use that. A lot of secondary schools will, or maybe you'll do like a Survey Monkey or something to ask these questions and save you a bit of time on kind of compiling the stats or going around to interrupt each class. Doing it online is an option, and it's up to yourselves. Doesn't matter what results you get from our point of view. Mostly you'll find there's not a huge amount of knowledge at the beginning, but yeah, that's not a problem. So the idea with this is that you do it in the first year, and then you repeat it in the second year, and you find out, has there been much improvement? And you can tell from doing it in the first year, where is there a big knowledge gap? What do we need to focus on? So that's the survey. And then the second element is looking at your school grounds. and creating a habitat map. So a habitat map basically is any kind of visual representation of your school grounds. And we have a lot of resources on working on this. Lisa might share some in the chat. So we have a guide to completing the habitat map. And within that, you'll find there's we actually did a teacher seminar last year just on creating habitat map. So there's a recording of that in the presentation on it. So you might find that helpful. Again, there's a lot of flexibility in how you create this. It can be, a bird's eye view is the most common way schools do this. We have had schools do like a 3D version. You can see here in the top right-hand corner. But the idea is to give you a starting point. What kind of habitats do you have on your grounds? Do you have a hedgerow? Do you have playing pitches? Do you just have concrete yard? Do you have any window boxes? And to identify places that, could you let a certain area grow wild? Is there a bit of green space that's not being used that you could put in? You could plant some bulbs, or that you could have a little vegetable garden, or you could put up bird feeders or bat boxes on the wall. So it's just having a look at what's there and what can be done with it. And again, this might be something that you could, ask a geography class to work on, or, your TY group, or maybe just some students on the committee would be able to do it. So there's, like I said, there's lots of different ways of doing it. I've got the presentation and the webinar recording linked here as well, so you'll get this at the end. And this is a nice example one school did where they sketched out the map, but then what they would do is they would add pictures to it, and they could change those as the seasons went on or as they made improvements or adjustments. So it can be kind of a living document that you continue to work on and change. So that's our habitat map. Then we have what we call recommended actions. So again, if we look at it from an application point of view, they're not essential. So you won't be marked down for not doing them, but they are nice ways of getting into the theme, and you can include them on your action plan just coming up. So you can investigate your habitats more thoroughly. So, all you really have to record in the habitat map is what kind of habitats are there. Is it a grass pitch? Is it a hedgerow? But you can also go in more detail, going, well, exactly what kind of species are growing here? Can you work out, what kind of trees they are? Do you have any birds living there? Any bees living there? You're probably getting late into the year for that. But there are still things like that around. So it's kind of documenting in more detail what you have, creating some kind of survey. So when you are going to record habitats or the species in them, it can be easiest to decide, okay, I'm just going to look at trees, or I'm just going to look at insects or birds or whatever it is. There's loads of different apps you can use. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Or you can just use kind of ID sheets or wildlife books. You can use your phone or a tablet to take pictures and try and identify later. And it's something that you can repeat seasonally or yearly, see how things change. So if you do a bird survey this year, and then later in the year you put up bird feeders that you're filling up regularly, you might want to repeat the survey at the same time the following year and see, has your number of birds increased because you're providing food for them. So those are just a few ideas on that. The third step then of the Green Schools program is to create an action plan. So an action plan just sets out what you aim to do over the course of your 2 years. So maybe you found that there was really good levels of awareness in your school about biodiversity, but you had very few practical or habitats for wildlife there. So you might decide to focus on creating good habitats, or it might be the opposite. You might have great school grounds, but actually nobody's using them and people are very unaware of biodiversity. So you might decide to focus on increasing those levels. But all of your actions should either aim to be, helping people to learn about biodiversity, increasing their awareness of why it's important, what the threats are, what kind of biodiversity you have in your community, or maybe making practical improvements. So adding habitats to your school grounds or to your local community, if that's an option. It's great to get involved in your, a tidy town group, or if you have a local forest or park or river, somewhere that you can take positive improvements. That's great. So here's just a few examples of the type of practical improvements you can make. Easiest one is to basically do nothing, to leave an area unmanaged. So this could be letting the grass grow. This could be, not tidying up when sticks and branches fall off. This can be really effective for wildlife, and it just involves, picking out an area for that, working with your caretaker, maybe putting up signs to let people know that that's what you're doing. And then you can also take more active steps like planting trees or flowers. Really important to make sure that they are native and that they're suitable for the place you're growing them in. I often get messages from schools who have, gone out and bought bee bombs or, bought packets of what are called, mixed seeds for meadows, and they say, oh, it didn't work. So that can happen a lot. You need to really be careful where you're buying these things. I would usually say it's better to let the seeds come in naturally if by leaving somewhere unmanaged than by buying mixed seeds. If you do want to plant seeds, I think you're generally better not buying a packet that are called mixed. Buy a packet of just one type of seeds, or buy several packets of different types. But the ones that are called mixed seeds, they often aren't great quality. So that's just a little warning on that. You could look at growing your own food crops. That can be a really nice thing to do, really important for biodiversity as well. So planting simple things like even different types of herbs, or things like strawberries can be really nice. Lettuces are a really quick growing crop, so it's something you can grow, in just a few weeks, or spring onions, things like that. You could create a new habitat, something like a small pond, a log pile, a leaf pile, a bug hotel. If you're in a school with very little green space, things like bird boxes, bird feeders, bat boxes can all be either attached to walls or hung on hooks or something. You don't need to have huge amounts of green space to do that. I just see that Mark Malloy has come, so he's our another EO from Galway. Do you want to say hi, Mark?
Hi, Claire. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Malloy here. I'm with the Galway County Council, the Environmental Awareness Officer, and I just wanted to pop in, say hello this evening, and to say that I'm available to help in any way in County Galway in relation to the biodiversity flag and the General Green Schools programme. So if you have any queries, maybe in any of the teams, you can use me as a local contact. Another thing that I'd like to say is that we're very lucky this year in County Galway in that we have just appointed in the last couple of months a biodiversity officer, who I know is very, very interested in being involved in both the Green Schools programme and the General Schools network as well, in relation to all the initiatives that she will be driving over the next couple of years, and at least this year. So again, it's great that we have an additional asset, in particular in relation to biodiversity here in County Galway. And I know that she, Rosina, who's the biodiversity officer, is very interesting work with the schools as well. So Claire, you probably have my contact details there as well for later on. So if any school wants to contact myself or the biodiversity officer, just drop me an email. We can talk on the phone, online, face to face, whatever sort of fits for us all, and then we can work together in relation to the programme. All right. Thanks, Claire, for the opportunity to introduce myself. Okay.
Thanks, Mark. Yep, no problem. So we'll just go back into this document. Yeah, so those are just a few ideas, like I said, for practical improvements. And then you can also look to kind of raise the general level of awareness in your school. So, you know, oftentimes when you're looking at practical improvements, maybe that's a project for, you know, a TY class. A lot of times we will have that kind of focus in secondary schools where that could be a project for the year of working on, you know, your garden or your outdoor space, or maybe you might set up you know, an after school gardening club, or your committee might be able to do that, or maybe just chances for your, you know, classes that are working on science or geography or subjects like that to get involved. Sometimes increasing levels of awareness can be good to do with the larger school community. You can do things like competitions. So picture here, this was a school in Dublin who had an art competition on creating a piece of art that was going to be put into a mural. So this painting was going to be kind of blown up and put on the wall of their school garden. Doesn't have to be something that's going to be displayed like that, but those kind of competitions can be nice to get other students involved that maybe aren't on the committee or working directly with you at all times. So looking at things like species surveys or habitat surveys, again, this can be something people do at lunchtime or even at home, you know, running competition, you know, taking part in the birdwatch survey during winter, who has the most, who can spot the most different types of birds, or, you know, maybe investigating species that are specific to your local area. So looking at maybe the name of your school or the area that you live in, a lot of times they're the Irish name might be connected to a particular tree or species of animal. Finding out a bit more about that. Looking at things like developing nature trails. So this is a really nice one for kind of overall wellness, is creating maybe a walk that goes through your school or around your school grounds that takes in different nature sites. If you do have a lot of trees on your grounds, for example, maybe creating signage for them that people can notice as they're going past. Here, just as Mark was saying, it can be really great to contact your local EAO, or now lots of the local authorities have newly established biodiversity officers, and find out, is there any local projects happening that maybe your school could get involved in? Are there any other local groups that are working on biodiversity that maybe you could connect with? And do try and share what you're doing with the wider community. Maybe write a piece for school newsletter, a blog. If you have an opportunity to get on a podcast, create a school podcast, those are all kind of things that you can try and do. So here's just a few ideas for supports if you are trying to identify different species. Good thing about biodiversity is there's so many groups that are interested in it, and there is an expert group for almost everything. So you know, there's the Birdwatch Ireland, there's the Tree Council, there's Wildflowers of Ireland, and for every kind of subgroup there'll be a website that has really good resources that you can check out. So just have a Google, and there's so many things that you'll find. A few good organizations to hook in with. If you do want to do kind of a more scientific approach, if you have a look at the National Biodiversity Data Centre, they are kind of Ireland's citizen science centre. So what they do is they take information from people all around the country about what they have seen in their local area, and they put it all together to create a big picture of what is going on a national level. So you can take part either kind of casually by just adding in, if you see something interesting, you can add it to them, but they also have ongoing projects that you can get involved in. A really great one to do can be taking part in the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. They have a specific plan for schools to make your grounds more pollinator friendly. So there's lots of different actions that you can take as a school, that can be a really nice project to get involved in. Or if you want to look on a bigger scale, check out the National Parks and Wildlife Service, their website, and look into maybe what your nearest national park is, and what kind of wildlife they have there. So here's just an example of an action plan, and we have that in our handbook, so you can have a look at that, take as many ideas from that action plan if you want, and then maybe add in a few of your own. So that's a really good place to start. And hopefully everybody has a hard copy of their biodiversity handbook by now. They were posted out last week to all the Year 1 schools, and the Year 2 schools should have them already. If anybody doesn't have a hard copy of the handbook, maybe let us know in the chat, and we can arrange to have one sent out, or find out has it been held up. We also have a PDF of that, that Lisa will share as well. The PDF is available in English and Irish, so you can share that PDF, with everyone on the committee if you want to do that. Step 4 then of the program is monitoring and evaluation. So that just means kind of seeing how you're getting along. Have you made improvements from your initial environmental review? Are you ticking off the boxes on your action plan? So again, we have two essential actions, and they're the exact same as your environmental review. So in your second year on the theme, we ask you to repeat the biodiversity awareness survey, and see has it changed, has your levels of awareness changed, and also it's to create either create a new habitat in Year 2, or just mark on any changes or improvements that you've made as you go. Don't get too hung up on have you started increasing massively the number of species on your school. It's really hard to do that in 2 years. I wouldn't expect, just because you plant X number of trees, to have deer walking in and nibbling on them or anything like that. But it's about kind of starting small, and hopefully things will start to gradually increase. So if you start to increase the number of flowering plants, for example, that's an improvement by itself, but also that will start to attract more pollinator species, and maybe that will attract things that want to eat those as well. So it is a gradual process, but we're not going to be looking at your application form and asking how many more different types of birds are visiting your school. That's not what it's about. Here's the kind of results we usually get from schools. So you'll see usually schools have a pretty low baseline in the awareness survey of what they know about biodiversity. It's usually less than 30% we get in terms of the answers in Year 1, and hopefully it will go up a lot in Year 2. So here's an example of the second year habitat map. So the school has just marked on it what they've added. So they've put in things like a leaf motel, a willow dome, and they've managed to identify the different types of trees that they had. And they've actually done something kind of cool. If you see these brown squares around, they've marked quadrats. These quadrats were just little areas of the grass that they left unmanaged, and it was a kind of a nice kind of little experiment that they were able to do, where they could check and see how many species of plants are inside the quadrats and how many are outside of it, and are they increasing the insects inside versus outside. So you can set up different little experiments like that. Step 5 then is linking your work on the Green Schools program to the curriculum. So this can be really helpful in secondary schools of going, how can we kind of squeeze this into other subjects? So there are some natural links there. So things like in maths, looking at the stats and analysis, even basic things like your survey. There's lots of links to science, and art. We have things like maybe doing a competition, or maybe creating signage for your school garden or for your Green Schools notice board. Home ec, just loads of possible links here. If you're growing your own food, maybe you could cook with it in home ec, or even looking into where does your food or your textiles come from. Woodwork, it's great if your school has a woodwork class. You can try and recruit those to create some bits and pieces for your school garden, and things like bird tables, window boxes. There's lots of options there. Something might come up in history is the changes in habitats over time. That can be a nice history project, again, maybe in TUI, or if you have time in other kind of cycles of looking at your own local area and what has changed over time. Was there more green space or wild spaces even 50 years ago? Step 6 then, so we're getting there now, is informing and involving. So this is really important in secondary schools, where I know it can be harder to get lots of people involved in all of the actions that you're taking. So it is important to keep the rest of the school informed. So things like your notice board. If you do have an information sharing system in your school like Teams, it's great to share information there. Some schools in the past will do things like, after they've had their awareness survey, maybe they'll share the results in that. Maybe someone on the committee could create a little presentation, just a few slides that can be shared there on, giving people kind of a bit more information that they weren't aware of during the survey, and letting people know of any events or actions that you're taking, letting people know through if you have a school newsletter or blog, if you have social media for your school, posting on that about what you're up to, and maybe linking in with some of the biodiversity related events during the year. So International Biodiversity Day is 22nd of May, and we'll be running events for the whole week around that. And similarly, we'll be doing the same for Tree Week. Maybe you can link in with things like National Spring Clean, and get your local community involved if you're doing an action day or day of planting or something like that in your school as well. And then the final step is creating a green code. So a green code is just something that tells us what your school's kind of attitude or commitment is to this theme. So it can be in any form you like. It can be a slogan. It can be like a code of conduct. It can be a song. It's up to yourselves. Again, this is a nice thing to run a competition for people to choose, and then just to make sure it is displayed in some way. So here's just a few pictures from different schools working on biodiversity. So top left-hand corner there is a bug hotel. This is a really popular thing for schools to do, and this is a really big one. It doesn't have to be as complicated as that. You can do things like leave out, just piles of rotting wood in a corner under a hedge. You can put out things like an old welcome mat on bare soil. You'll find that makes an amazing bug hotel. So there's lots of simple things too. We've got some bird houses here made by a woodwork department. The girls here in the bottom left have planted some kind of vegetable seeds in their pots there, so they're about to plant them outside. And then we obviously have things like litter pickups. It's really important for, like we said, biodiversity, to avoid litter and pollution. Okay, so just give you a bit of information about the actual renewal process. And so if you're in your second year on the theme, or third or fourth, you can apply this year if you want. Our application form has to be submitted by the 15th of March 2024 if you're applying this year. But before you submit your application form, you must have your renewal visit first. So you can arrange to have a renewal visit at any stage in year 2. You don't have to wait until the beginning of March to do that. You can do it a bit earlier. Don't worry if you haven't got everything done by the time you get your renewal visit, because you can talk about future plans at that. It's the same for your application form. You can include in your application form if you're planning on doing, you know, an action day later in the year, because, you know, March is quite early. Lots of schools like to do things in the bit later on, you know, maybe after the Easter holidays when the weather's a bit nicer, so that's fine. So your renewal visit is something you arrange. It's usually with your environmental awareness officer, and you can just arrange a date that suits you both. So this isn't like a school inspection. It's much more informal than that, and it's just a way for you to present the work that you've done and allow the committee members to speak and to talk about how they found the theme. Our award ceremonies are back to being in person. Last year, we went back to being in person for the first time, which is great. So that hopefully will continue this year. And then, one kind of exciting change we have this year. It's the first year we're going to be awarding a Biodiversity School of the Year. So we'll have a winner in a primary school category and a secondary school category. You don't have to do anything to apply to be awarded with this. We'll be selecting the winners based on your application form. So you don't need to enter this competition. You'll just be entered automatically by sending in an application form for your green flag. And the winning school for both categories will be presented with their awards during our green flag award ceremony. So when you're coming to be given your green flag, the winner will be given then. And this will just be based on the best overall school in terms of getting either raising awareness and or making practical improvements on your school grounds, as well as getting community involvement and school involvement. So it's basically how well your school completes the 7 steps, and we'll be picking a winner. So a great place to get information is the Green Schools website. There's huge numbers of resources and activities on biodiversity theme. A good place to start is the biodiversity theme page. Lisa might share that with you there, because it can be a bit daunting scrolling through our resource section and going, well, what works for us? But if you do go to resources, you can search by biodiversity, and you can also add in that you're a secondary school and that you're looking for, case studies, or, you can kind of pick and choose what kind of resources to look for. You might find as well, we do have a video case study that we did with a secondary school who completed the theme the year before last, where we spoke to the committee members and they kind of told us how they went about working on it. So that's a nice thing to check out, or maybe you could use that to recruit some other committee members, just to see how that secondary school went about it. So I definitely advise you to check out the website. And then a few biodiversity dates for your diary. So National Tree Week is going to be from March 18th to 22nd. We'll have a lot of hopefully webinars and events on then that you can get involved in. We're coming up, I haven't put it in here, but it is National Tree Day. We have both a Tree Day and a Tree Week in Ireland. So Tree Day is October 5th. And if you are interested in planting trees with your school, there's lots of good opportunities to get free trees coming up to Tree Week. There's a couple of different organizations. So places like Easy Treesy, Biodiversity in schools have an opportunity to get free trees, and the Tree Council also. So you can look to plant possibly either for Tree Day or Tree Week. But tree planting season is generally October till the end of March, so they both fit in with that timeline. We also have then Biodiversity Day and Biodiversity Week coming up in May. Again, we'll have some events on then. I know that will be coming up to the end of your school year. So if you are looking to hold an action day, it might fit in better for Tree Week if everyone is really busy for that May week. And then just a couple of last things that are not directly related to biodiversity theme, but they're open to all schools. So one is Climate Action Week, which is coming up October 16th to 22nd. So there will be lots of events on then, and lots of things for you to potentially get involved with. And then also from our climate program, we have a program called the Climate Ambassadors. This is a program that either secondary school students can apply to be part of, as kind of any adult who is a citizen in Ireland. And basically you get training, you go to networking events with other climate ambassadors, and you get given all the tools to be like an ambassador in your community on climate. So that's a really nice program if you're really keen, or if there are really keen students in your school. So climateambassador.ie is the place to look there. And then lastly, on climate, there's a new program that we're involved with this year called Climate Smart. This is a program for transition year students. If you're in Cork or Dublin, you can look to get in-person workshops. And if you are anywhere else in the country, there are 7 online workshops aimed at TY students on climate. So that is a nice thing to check out if you're interested in that. One other free program that's available to all schools is SEAI. So they have got a whole lot of secondary school workshops that are aimed at either TY students, and then they have ones for junior cert science, business, home ec, and geography. And there's also teacher CPD available. So those are all free of charge, and you can book through us here. So you can click on these links. So again, I'll be sending this on. This here, if anyone has their phone on them and wants to sign up to the Green Schools newsletter, you can scan the QR code, and that will take you to the sign up page. And this can be a nice thing to do, because when you're working on the biodiversity theme, you'll mostly just get updates on biodiversity, but there is tons of other events and activities and things going on in our other themes and programs. So if you want to be kept up to date on those, there's lots of things you can potentially get involved in there. Okay, so that was a lot of information to throw at you all, I know. So hopefully you were able to stay with me there. But I will finish up here and stop recording this recording. And then if anybody does have any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat box, or if you want, you can turn on your camera or your microphone even, and ask. So I'll just stop this recording.